Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming in such large numbers. It's an absolute honor for me to be moderating this conversation with two artists that I absolutely adore and have been very privileged to work with in the last months. Sumayya Vally, the architect of this year's pavilion, and Torkwase Dyson, who currently who developed a sound commission for the pavilion, but also just opened her show at Pace Gallery, the inaugural show for the new space of the gallery. I think you all probably had a chance to visit the pavilion and probably have heard quite a lot about it in the past months. So I wanted to structure this conversation more around the synergies between Torkwase and Sumayya rather than an introduction to the pavilion, which I'm sure you will all see and enjoy during its last week. So Sumayya, I'll start with you. When we started working on this project, it was really clear that the pavilion itself was not a goal for you, that it actually was what the structure enabled and sort of who it enabled and who it invited to bring sort of other voices and to be a platform for other voices. So I wanted to ask you, how has that process been, and how have all the activations that we did in the pavilion and outside of it changed it, and what has that done to the structure and to your practice?
Thanks so much, Natalia, for this question and this beautiful introduction. Also, it's my honor to be speaking with you, and I think it's been such a special working experience over the last year to realize all these collaborations, magical and otherwise, in the pavilion, both of you. Yes, absolutely. As you said, I think that for me, design and architecture is an extremely important political form, and a form of politics that I hold in very high regard and always hold accountable in that regard, in that it should always be seen as a form that is deeply imbued with politics. And so, of course, the design of the pavilion itself is very important, and the forms that it embodies, that it draws on all of these gathering places, has been really important in forming the design. But more important than that, as you rightly said, is that it becomes a platform to enable different forms of gathering. And as we know, there are the fragments of the pavilion located in neighborhoods across London, where we have been working on collaborations across the year, and hopefully will continue beyond this year as well. But I think also recognizing the value of bringing in other forms and other disciplines into the fold of the architectural realm. And it's been an absolute honor to listen to Torkwase's sound piece in the pavilion, along with the other sound commissions as well, because I feel deeply that forms of ritual practice and forms of making atmosphere are also really important parts of the architectural realm that we need to recognize more deeply. And sound, for me, is something that is transportative. It's also a vessel that is able to hold memory. Even though it's intangible, the repetition of sound somehow takes us to, it's a form of honoring that is dynamic, if I can put it like that. And I think that there's something so profound in being able to listen to voices from elsewhere, and in being able to understand that memory can also be carried in that form and in that way. And so many forms of honoring and remembering in the African tradition are so much to do with sound and atmosphere. So it's been a really wonderful part of the commission that we've gotten to work with so many sound artists.
Yeah, I remember that when we were when we decided that we will commission 4 artists to develop these sound commissions for the pavilion, you were sort of especially excited about that part because of your interest in archive, and very much in oral archive, very much in speaking in mother tongues, very informal forms of archive, sound archive, be it music or telling stories. So that was a really big part and big excitement for you as well. Could you tell us a little bit more about your sort of work and interest in archives, and especially sonic archives?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm interested in all forms of archive that don't necessarily fit within the traditional forms of archive. And so the pavilion has a deep interest in places archive and in looking at many forms of gathering and the power of gatherings and events to commune people and to bring them together. And I was interested in finding ways for the pavilion to bring those moments together and to express them in form. And to include in the formal realm things that are formal architectural spaces, but also informal moments or more ephemeral moments, like a canopy over a market where, you know, transactions are shared and occur, and surfaces that are unrolled into the street where people gather. Holding those in the same space as really big institutional spaces became really important. But also thinking about being able to honor voice through the sound commissions and to recognize that there are so many other forms of archive in dust and in the earth, in recipes, songs, stories, in mythologies. And of course, thinking about voice and the oral is a kind of keystone in thinking through that. And so much of our programming has focused on this because of that. So we had reading sessions at New Beacon Books in Finsbury Park with Kotia Newland. You know, also just reflecting on listening to those readings, there's so much about the power of coming together through voice and the recognition of the importance of archives that are going to be lost because we're unable to recognize them as important forms of archive.
Everything you're saying kind of loops me back now to Torkwase. When I remember when we first met online, you met with Sumayya, there were so many synergies between you, and even now when Sumayya is talking, I can see you nodding, and I know that you share so many of the same sort of research or similar research interests, and are interested in kind of everything that Sumayya just said. And I just wanted to ask you, when you were developing this commission, how you worked on it, because it's a very interesting process that you go through when you sort of arrived at the sound piece, but there's so much more that you use in terms of mediums to get to there. And I just was thinking about what Atakwami just said in the video, you know, that like he works with his whole body, and that kind of also reminded me of you and your practice. So I just wanted to ask what kind of were the elements of the pavilion that you have taken on, and how you developed the sound commission.
Thank you for having me. This sound commission, this is my first sound commission, so I think I'm going to answer your question backwards. And what I realized after making it was a new connection with my mother, and I think I talked a little bit about this last night, and I think I want to talk about it a little bit more now. And my mother is 73 and started taking singing lessons, and she was taking, you know, these lessons, and she said, "Hey, I'm going to take singing lessons." I was like, "Oh, fine, that's great. Take singing lessons, have at it." And she sent me a song called "The Rose," and I heard it, and it just rearranged my relationship with her, and it rearranged the way I think about storytelling. And it's, you all know this song by Bette Midler, "The Rose." You should Google it. It's a beautiful, beautiful story. But when I think about architecture and I think about my mother's song in this installation, I put it together because I really wanted to honor another person that I think about, Sylvia Wynter, who talks about human beings, and what's so important about the way our minds work is we're storytellers, that we can tell these stories over and over again. And the way in which my mother told this story about love, it let me know that I would be connected to her forever. Right? It was a different kind of archive in my mind. And then installing it in the pavilion, I was, working with L-Acoustics, it allowed me to throw that sound all over the place and have an overall experience of this woman's voice that was my mother. So I think I'm just in that mind space, really. I did a part of the sound work as a recording of me drawing and mark making. I draw mostly every day, and then I'm aware of my own respiratory system, and it's working, and I appreciate it working. And at the end, I add an Aretha Franklin song, and this process has just been really a sort of arc of narrative and storytelling for me that really just takes me back to my mother. I can't think about it in any other way.
That's really beautiful. One of the sort of other references that you both share, and I know that you've recently also worked with that person on another piece that you were doing, is Christina Sharp. I think during the first conversation that we had together as well, Christina came up and you were saying that you were working with her as one of the collaborators on your show at Pace. And actually the very first submission that Sumayya has sent for as a proposal for the pavilion, Christina's In the Wake was a sort of key reference and that kind of key text that you really base your proposal on. And I wanted to sort of ask you a bit more, because I know that you've known Christina for several years now. I don't think you've met yet, but that it is kind of like this key reference for both of you. So I guess to you, Torkwase, I just wanted to ask you about your collaboration and influence that Christina's work has on your practice, and then you, Sumayya, maybe can build up on that.
No, I think how I entered the wake is Christina is a fabulous storyteller as well. And she's able to take form of politic, of history, and roll it into a kind of subjective system that allows us to think about what Ronaldo talks about, this idea of the long emancipation. Like, what does it mean to be Black? What does it mean to be in the wake of the transatlantic slave trade? And it means to be in a condition of the long emancipation. And what Christina Sharp is able to do through these histories of her own and longer histories is really place social sciences in the field of social science and literature in a way where we understand both slow violence and fast violence. So In the Wake has been a text to think about slowness and think about time, and also think about how do you develop form from something deeply subjective that allows you into a system that we're sort of all under as humans and sentient beings. So it's a really interesting way, and Dion does this too, but it's a really interesting way to think about what another person, Horton Spillers, asked for is this new demography, this new kind of science that incorporates migration, that incorporates movement, that incorporates not empathy but compassion, right? So Christina and I have been thinking alongside each other and thinking alongside other writers to understand what is needed in this moment of climate change, what is needed in this recognition of the long emancipation. So it's this ongoingness, I think, with the collaborations that inspire the work.
I was deeply inspired by the In the Wake text, and as you said, it was right up there alongside many other references in the first submission. And I just want to resonate and echo what Torkwase is saying about this idea of the long durational project, and Hans Ulrich mentioned it last night as well. But for me, a big part of the inspiration for the pavilion was to think about it as a platform, more than a commission of just a project with a finite lifespan, even though we know all the pavilions have other lives. But also to think about the structures that it sits within and alongside, and how it can work to speak to those also at different paces and at different durations. So there's the lifespan of the pavilion over the summer, but then there's also as we said, there's the fragments, and we have the support structures program, which hopefully will be an ongoing legacy of the project as well. And I was also really intent and interested in terms of thinking through this long durational project, as Hans-Ulrich mentioned, that we think about past voices, present voices, and future voices, and we bring them into the same realm. And there's something about this idea of an ancestry and a future and a legacy of voices that we all stand within. I hope the pavilion speaks to that. And then there was also something about the way that Christina defines the wake in many different forms. And that really opens us up to this entanglement between climate change, race and social justice, and many of the issues that we face today, and that they're all deeply entangled.
Another thing that you both sort of share is the interest in space, sort of politics of space, and space as political. And even with your pavilion and with all the proposals that we went through, we were very much aware that there isn't such thing as a neutral space. That the Kensington Gardens are also it's a chart space. You walked around London, you visited almost every neighborhood, and we're very aware of that kind of play that you wanted to fold London onto Kensington Gardens and then fold the pavilion out into London. So I wanted to talk about that a bit with both of you. And Torkwase, you very frequently say about your practice deals with or engages with spatial liberation. And I was just wondering if you could say a little bit more about that, also in relation to your sound commission that we have here.
Sure. I think that we were just talking about Christina, and one thing she posits in the book is this idea of climate. And she uses this phrase, climate, to really think about the multiple encounters that we're living through now. This social, environment, scientific, technological, all of these encounters create this sort of climate, right? And within that climate, as Christina sort of poses, I'm interested in what I call Black compositional thought, right? And that is, again, Sylvia Winters, how do we use our brains in relationship to our minds to move through space, right? And that could be architectural, that could be infrastructural, that can be environmental. It also can be about the imagination, right? So with the pavilion in particular, when I received the file, I spoke a little bit about this last night, when I received the file, I was able to, through technology, sort of move through the space or move through the SketchUp drawing or whatever it was, and use my imagination in relationship to my breath, right? So Black compositional thought says, okay, with a healthy imagination, with clean air, with a healthy and peaceful environment, I can exhaust the possibilities of my imagination in space, right? That's one way to think about Black compositional thought. Another way to think about it is in real-time improvisation, right? And we know that improvisation is stacked with technique and stacked with a kind of knowing. Cecil Taylor talks about this, how can you pull off an improvisation and a creativity with all of the knowledges that you have? So as to say, with the ongoingness of gaining all these skills that we have as humans, how do we then, in a safe space, produce new kind of improvisational movements? And that can be, again, in relationship to science or technology or geography. And that is to say that with these encounters, with these geographies, how do we build anew? So I'm constantly thinking about compositional thought. And I'll say this last thing. In the pavilion, the condition is a curvilinear condition, right? There's so much geometry and math happening in that space, is that I can, with my imagination, before I even landed there, sort of move my mind through that space. And if I can move my mind through that space, I know my respiratory system will follow, right? An embodied experience of the body in real time. So I'm interested in all those kinds of things around spatial liberation, right? All of those things are kind of connected, if that makes sense.
Sumayya, do you want to add anything to this?
I just maybe want to reflect on what you're saying now, because it sounds, I think, of course, it's probably been in you for a very long time, but you also mentioned that it's your first time working on a sound piece. And I wanted to ask about that experience and also ask about where it's going, maybe.
Well, I'm trying to get my mother to sing a few more songs. I really tried to get her to think about different narratives and what would it mean to make a sound piece in a room or architecture that was built to both support silence and sound. And I've also been thinking about opera as a form of storytelling and kind of immediacy, and the idea that opera as a narrative sort of platform sort of gets right to the condition of being and belonging. So I'm just trying to think about, with Hans's and his unrealized project question, how to create another unrealized project, and that may be something between an opera in relationship to my mother, in relationship to climate, and in relationship to mark making and love, you know?
Well, we'll be all looking very much forward to that. For now, thank you so much for this conversation, and all of you can see the realized projects just across the bridge. Sumayya's Pavilion and Torkwase's sound piece are here until this Sunday, so please visit today and often this week. And actually, one last thing that I wanted to say is on Sunday, we're also closing the pavilion with a sound system Sunday at the Tabernacle in Notting Hill, one of our partners, programmed with Sumayya and the CEO of Notting Hill Carnival, Matthew Phillip, and artist Alvaro Barrington. So if you would like to come and listen to some much needed music after this week, please do join us. Thank you so much, Torkwase. Thank you so much, Sumayya. And have a great week, everyone.